MNHS, we work to collect, interpret, and disseminate the history and heritage of the Brown County area. And today we'd like to welcome Megan Narvey of the Minnesota State Historical Society to talk to us about saving your stuff. So, how do we save our stuff? All right. In the middle of the
Yeah. Press it again.
Everybody can hear her.
There you go.
All right, it's on now. Everyone can hear me? Is it too close to my?
You're okay.
Okay. All right. It's a pleasure to be here to see everyone come to this talk. I have a tendency to talk really fast during this presentation and give you a lot of information really fast also. And that's why I've provided everyone with these handy little handouts so that you don't have to worry about taking notes or memorizing everything that I've told you or looking everything up on your phone, all of the links or anything. You have all of that information right in front of you. You can take it home at the end of the day, and you will also have my contact information is in there, so if you have questions too and you don't get to ask me, you will be able to find me later. So brace yourselves, this is going to be a whirlwind. All right, so my name is Megan Narvey. I'm the Outreach Conservator at the Minnesota Historical Society, and there's one way to contact me, but there will be others also. My job at the Minnesota Historical Society is basically just to do outreach and talk to people, talk to individuals, and also talk to local historical societies and other museums and stuff about how to take care of their collections and how to preserve things for a really long time. And my qualifications for doing this is that I have studied specifically conservation, the conservation and care of things. I have 2 master's degrees that are specifically in conservation. So it's like a specific field of study that I have that's in conservation. Studied it for a long time, and I have worked in different places that are specifically about like preserving and treating things, and it's just, there's a lot of information and a lot of specialization, and like I'm expressing this to you so that you understand that there is going to be a lot of information in this talk, and by the end of it, you're still going to be like, oh my God, there's a lot of more information that I don't know. That's because it's complicated, and that's why there are experts that can help you with these things when you have extra questions. So, all that to say, let's get started. Here's what I'm going to talk to you about. I'm going to talk to you first with a brief overview of how to preserve and protect the things that you value, and then I'm going to give you an overview of where to find more resources so that if you are up against a question that you don't know the answer to when you're home later, you know how to find resources on the internet or in the library later about how to find answers to your questions. And then after that, we're going to have some time for questions and answers. And the faster I talk right now, the more time for Q&A we have later, and that's the most fun. So, the framework that we have for understanding how to preserve things is this framework called the 10 Agents of Deterioration. And this is it was developed by the Canadian Conservation Institute, which is this government agency in Canada completely devoted to caring for things. It's very cool that the government in Canada is like, we have an agency devoted to conservation. We don't have that in America. Very jealous. But the 10 Agents of Deterioration, it sounds really cool, right? It sounds like spies, but it's not spies. The 10 Agents of Deterioration instead are these things. They are physical forces, relative humidity, water, pests, and then there are also some things that are like a little bit more obscure and difficult to understand, like dissociation. I'm going to go through each of these agents of deterioration with you and quickly explain what it looks like, what it can do to your things, and how to protect your things from it. And by the end, you'll have like a quick breakdown of like the most important things to do to protect your stuff. So I'll start with physical forces. This is basically any kind of damage caused by impact, vibration, pressure, rubbing. The kind of damage that it causes is dents, tears, cracks, chips, punctures, distortion, breaks. And the main sources of this kind of damage are from handling, holding things, gravity, if you drop something. Shipping is a big cause of this kind of damage, construction, vibration, and then on a bigger scale, earthquakes, vandalism, natural disasters. What to do about it? This is a really important one. It's providing protection and support for fragile items when they are stored, handled, moved, and displayed. So handling things carefully, thinking them through before you pick something up. How are you picking it up? Are you using two hands or just one hand? Are you using cushioning and stable mounts and stable furniture? Are you displaying something on a rickety stand or table, or is it something that's really securely mounted to the wall? You know, like, is this on a display case that is really, really stable, or is it gonna fall if a 2-year-old runs past it really fast? These are like the kinds of questions that if you take care of them right up front, you won't have to worry about damage happening later and having to fix the damage afterwards. If you plan ahead before moving things, this can also be a really important step to preventing damage. So a big thing to think about is when you pick something up, have a plan for where you're gonna put it down before you start. So if you already have a place set aside for where you're gonna put it down, then you don't have to like, oh, I have this thing in my hands and I don't have anywhere to put it down, so I have to like hold it with one hand and like clear a spot on the table, or like if you have to open a door but you have something in your hands and you don't have any way to open the door. There's a lot of steps that can be avoided safely if you plan ahead and think things through before you move things. And so these are just the sorts of things that can protect your stuff from damage by physical forces. Oh, moving the wrong way. All right, another kind of agent of deterioration is fire. This is a really big one, but hopefully it's one that nobody ever experiences. Damage caused by fire looks like it can be smoke, soot, heat, and it can be damage from the extinguishing methods, such as water, and it can also be complete destruction. It looks like charring, staining, melting, cracking, shattering, and water damage. And I like to point out that the most common causes of house fires are from cooking and faulty heating equipment. So fire is really a rough one to talk about because there's like obviously not a lot that we can do after a fire to prevent the fire damage or to recover from the fire damage. Fire, unless it's like a very small fire causes very, very, very bad damage to our things. It's very difficult to recover from fire damage, and sometimes it results in the complete destruction and like your stuff is just gone. So the most important thing you can do to protect yourself from fire is to just be very cautious about fire detection and fire safety. So protecting yourself from the agent of deterioration fire, it's important to have smoke detectors, fire extinguishers, fire blankets, and to practice fire safety. It's very important, and this is something that I always say in this presentation very emphatically, is that human life is always more important than your valuables, whatever your valuables are. This is the official position of the Minnesota Historical Society. I'll take that. I'll take that load. Your lives are always more valuable than whatever you have. So protect yourself. Get out of your house. Don't try to save things. When you have a disaster and you have things that have been damaged, there are some things you can do to recover those items. It's probably not going to look exactly the same after a disaster as it was before the disaster, but you can get help recovering those items. And I have this lovely little helpline here. The National Heritage Responders are a national organization of volunteers that help people respond to disasters and give them advice on what to do after a disaster to help them save their things. And this is their email address when you need help. They're really great. You can also email me and I can give you advice. I'm also a National Heritage Responder, so I am connected with this organization. I'm connected with the Minnesota Alliance for Heritage Response. We also have local people who help with heritage response here. So lots of people around who want to help. Always the wrong way. Okay. The next natural disaster is water. Water is a lot more common to see in Minnesota than fire. Water damage is going to happen to everyone, and so you have to be really prepared for water damage in Minnesota to protect your stuff. Water damage can be caused by liquid water, especially from leaks, floods, or condensation, and the damage it causes is going to be mold growth, physical damage and distortion, staining, running of inks and dyes, tide lines, hardening of shrinking of surfaces like leather, corrosion and rust, tarnish of metals, and the blanching of varnishes. And blanching of varnishes is like those cup circles that you get on tables and stuff when it turns white. That's an example of blanching. So how can you protect your stuff from water? There's a few different ways to do it. The most important way you can do it, and I'm going to repeat myself several times throughout this presentation, and this is not something that you're going to enjoy hearing. The most important way you can protect your stuff from water damage is to avoid storing your precious belongings in attics and in basements. And that's because water is most frequently going to come in through your attic, because that's where water comes in when you have leaks in your roof, or through your basement when you have flooding in your basement. And not only are those like really common spots where you're gonna get water coming in, but they're also like, you're not gonna notice the water coming in for a while, probably, unless you're in those spaces all the time, which most people aren't. So if you keep your stuff in like the main living areas of your home, especially like the stuff that's really important to you that you really wanna save, then you're much less likely to have to deal with the fallout of like really bad water damage. Performing regular building maintenance is also a great way to prevent water damage, because when our buildings are sort of falling apart, that's also when we get the worst water damage. So like cleaning up your gutters, doing your landscaping, that sort of thing. Repairing your roof. And then another piece of advice that I like to give is to store and display items in boxes, frames, and display cases to add a layer of protection. So this archives box is a great example. I'm gonna do a little, you can see the archives box. I've had numerous examples now where people, if they have stored things inside of a box, and water gets into their home or their museum or something like that, if it's inside of the box, you catch the water early, the box might get wet, the stuff inside might still be dry. You can take the dry stuff out of the box, throw out the box, put the dry stuff into a new box, it's good as new. If the stuff got wet itself, then you have a whole different problem. You have to figure out how to dry out the stuff itself while salvaging it and trying to keep it looking as new as possible, as nice as possible. That's really difficult, it's really hard. It costs money if you have to hire professionals. Even professionals aren't always going to be able to make it look like it never was damaged before in the first place. If you are able to store things in boxes, frames, and display cases, it just gives you like an extra time to help protect your stuff from damage like this, that like gives you a layer of protection and like more notice to help save your stuff. So I really recommend, it's just one more reason to keep your stuff in those boxes and cases. All right, the next agent is pests. Pests can be insects, certain insects, not every insect, but certain insects are particularly bad. Rodents, birds, bats, and microorganisms like mold. These are all covered by the pests title. They will cause physical damage, like munching through things and leaving holes. They can cause staining from their excretions, and they also cause health and safety concerns. I worked previously in Arizona where we had mice problems. When there were mice problems, there were big hantavirus problems because in Arizona every mouse was a big hantavirus risk. And so in one house, house museum we worked in, there was a big mouse risk. And to go in there to clean and remove artifacts, we had to dress in full personal protective gear, like a Tyvek suit and respirators and masks and gloves. We were going into a full, really, really dangerous space, and it was really intense. And that's true for mice. It's true for other kinds of pests as well. Like bird poop is also really bad for you to breathe in. Mold is really bad for you to breathe in. Pests are gross and also not good for you. So we don't like them at all. Sources of damage include nesting. They use our stuff as a food source. They lay their eggs and then their little babies also eat our stuff. They will gnaw on things and they will poop on things. So how can you protect yourself from pests? Regular housekeeping, keeping spaces neat and tidy is really important because pests prefer to be in sort of messy spaces. It's less appealing to them to be in a space that's clean and tidy, and also it's way easier to spot them if your space is clean and tidy because you can see that something is messy or oh, that's a new poop, I didn't notice that before. You want to monitor for pest activity by looking at places regularly, looking inside of your storage boxes and stuff pretty regularly. And this is another reason to keep things in your regular living spaces and not in attics and basements, because you're not as likely to go into your attic and basement and look around for pest activity, whereas in your actual living space in your home, you're looking around all the time and monitoring for pest activity because you don't want there to be mice in the space where you live. Whereas if there's a mouse living in your basement, you're not going to spot it right away. Pests also like it when it's more humid and the temperature's a little warmer, so keeping your environment at a lower humidity and a lower temperature is going to be less appealing for pests. And here is my official advice for if you find something with insects living in it. The way to safely kill bugs and remove them from your items, say you find moths living in your wool, something that you're trying to preserve, is to freeze them. This is safe for almost all materials. Almost everything that you have is going to be safe to freeze, and it will kill most every single bug. So what you do is you take your item, you put it in a bag. Usually I like to tell people to use a clear plastic bag, clear garbage bag or something. So clear garbage bag, knot the end so that it's sealed. Put it in a freezer, a chest freezer if it's a big thing, and leave it there for a week or two. Take it out of the freezer and let it come up to room temperature. For most bugs, this is enough to have killed them. For Minnesota bugs, because our Minnesota bugs are kind of tough, they're used to freezing, I like to tell people to bring it up to room temperature and then freeze them again really fast. Because then they'll be like, you think you can kill me? I'm too smart. And then they'll die in the second freezing. So the bag itself is to protect the thing from the other stuff in your freezer, but also because then when it is warming up, the condensation will occur on the bag and not on the item itself. So it's really important for it to be bagged. Light damage is one of the most crucial elements in a museum and in your home to protect your items from deterioration, and it's a hard one for people to hear. So this one is very important to talk about. Damage caused by both visible and ultraviolet light, UV light from the sun, and light bulbs is both cumulative and irreversible damage. It will look like fading, bleaching, embrittlement, yellowing, weakening, and breaking. This here, this little weird triangle, this is a patch from a crazy quilt, and it's an example of what happens to silk when it's been in light for too long. Silk has this inherent quality that is very, very, very sensitive to light. It's called shattering. When silk has been in light for too long, it will literally disintegrate and it will shatter, is what it's called. So silk is very sensitive to light, but almost everything is very sensitive to light. There are only a few materials that are not. And there's nothing that you can do once something has been exposed to light for too long. You can't put it in a closet and let it rest, and then it will look better afterwards. It will just always be faded. It will always be a little bit worse than it was before. So the best thing that you can do is just be very conscious of how much light you're exposing something to. At the same time, obviously, we don't want to put things in the dark forever all the time because we want to look at things and enjoy things. There's no purpose to owning things if we never look at them and enjoy them. So it's a balancing act, right? We want to be able to do both. So how do we do it? How do we do it safely? There are a few ways. The first way that I recommend to everybody is to make sure that all your light bulbs in your house are LED light bulbs. LED light bulbs are the best kind of light bulbs. That's this kind, this one. That's usually what you buy in the store now anyway. They don't have any UV light that comes out of them. UV light is a portion of the light spectrum that doesn't have any visible component to it, so we can't see it at all. It's completely invisible to our eyes, but it has the most energy and the most harmful effects to the things that we have. It's also the part of light that gives us sunburns when we're out in the sun for too long. So sun has a lot of UV in it. Light bulbs, when they have UV in it, it's like adding nothing for us, and it's causing a lot of harm. So like, let's get rid of it. Use LED light bulbs. Another good way, obviously, like I just said, sunlight has a lot of UV in it. Keep items on display away from direct sunlight. So keep them away from windows or places where the sun comes in direct beams. Like, don't put pictures on the wall in a place where you're gonna get a direct beam of light on them. I like to tell people to display copies of things rather than the originals. If you have original documents or original photos or something like that, no one will notice, no one will care if it's a copy of the original rather than the original. You can keep the original tucked away somewhere safe in your records, in your safety deposit box, wherever you want to keep it that's safe. And then put a copy on the wall to display and to enjoy. And then the copy can have as much light damage as you want it to have, and you can just replace it over time, and no one will, like, you can just copy it again, and whatever. So, display copies. Obviously, this doesn't work for everything. Some things, like quilts, or like other, like jackets, or something like that, you can't just like make a copy of it and like put that on display. So how do you display those and protect them from light? You can do some really basic math. So now I'm going to do some math with you guys. You guys, I promise you, you will find this not super complicated. So light damage is cumulative and irreversible. You can do really simple math to do like a value judgment for yourself. So if you have a quilt that you really want to put on display, you can put it on display for an entire year, and it will get the same amount of light damage in a year as it would get if you put it on display for 1 month for 12 years. So if you put it on display for the month of December for all of your holiday parties and all of the times your family's over in December, because that's when people see it the most, then you could put it on display for 12 years for the same amount of light damage as it would get in 1 year. So using some like very basic math there, you see that it's extended the life of the quilt by 12 years. That's the simple math that you can do. The rest of the time that the quilt is not on display, you just keep it in a dark storage closet in the main living space of your home, not in the attic or the basement. And preferably in a box, because I like boxes, they keep things a little bit safer. So I'll move on from that. Relative humidity is a little bit complicated to talk about just because relative humidity can be bad if it's high, or if it's low, or if it's too much of both. It really likes to be sort of in the middle, but there's a trick to it, which is that the things that we have like to be at the same humidity level as like people do. So I'll talk about that a little bit in a second. But the wrong kind of humidity can cause damage like mold growth. Mold will start growing anytime above about 70% relative humidity. The higher the humidity is, the more likely mold is to start growing. It will also cause splitting or cracking if the relative humidity is shifting around a lot. It can cause rust and tarnish on metals, and it will cause warping. Like these pictures, I'm sure people have noticed or seen pictures when they start to like roll up like this. It's because sort of like, let me see how I can describe it. I haven't figured out the best way to describe this easily yet. Humidity, the water that's in the air, is absorbed and released by materials that are organic or sort of made out of like natural materials. So when, like, you know, in the summer when it's really humid and the doors like swell up and they get kind of hard to close, and then in the winter things dry out and everything shrinks a little bit. A photograph is made out of different kinds of organic materials. There's the paper layer on the back, and then there's the gelatin layer on the top, which has the picture on it. And those materials expand and contract with humidity at different rates. And so when the temperature and the humidity are shifting a lot, then they'll respond differently, and they causes the photos to curl up in weird ways. So it's just the way that you can prevent that from happening is making sure you have your photos stored in boxes or in frames so that they're under tension of some sort, or they're protected from shifts in humidity. Sources of problems with your relative humidity can be just the natural climate. For example, the natural climate of Minnesota can be really weird. Heating, the way that you're heating or cooling a building, or if you have problems with water getting into a building or condensing on a window or something like that. And the way to protect your stuff is to avoid storing things in attics or basements where you get the weird problems with your humidity. And to use display cases, frames, and storage boxes to buffer those shifts in humidity. So when you have like a frame or a storage box, it's the changes in humidity are happening slower inside the box than outside of the box. The box is providing some buffering capacity so that everything that's inside of the box is more protected from what's happening outside of the box. If the temperature and humidity are changing really fast outside, or if it like gets really humid one day and then really dry the next day, it's just happening a lot slower inside of the box because the box itself is reacting at a slower rate. So it's a lot better to keep things in boxes. The recommended conditions for humidity are between 40 and 60%. This is like really, really hard to achieve even in a museum. The reason that I have these recommended conditions here for you is not so that you start tracking your humidity in your house and like freaking out every time it's not within this range, but so that you understand that the correct relative humidity to preserve your stuff is basically the right relative humidity that you also like as a person. We also like it when it's like in that range. We don't enjoy it when it's so dry that our skin is cracking in the winter and so humid that we're like really like ugh in the summer. It's basically the same for our stuff. So that's an easy way to understand it. We like our stuff. The stuff likes the same stuff we do. Incorrect temperature is also a way that things deteriorate, especially with high temperature. This is the main way things will fall apart. It will cause things to melt, warp, yellow, become sticky, and plastics will deteriorate rapidly. Low temperatures can be bad sometimes, but really it's only when you're handling things and they're cold, because things will become more brittle and prone to break if they're very cold. Fluctuating temperatures will actually cause the same problems as the changing humidity. So what to do about incorrect temperature? Avoid storage in attics and basements. Avoid storage or display in direct sunlight or above radiators where things are likely to get quite hot. And digitize your sensitive film formats, such as nitrate films, acetate films, and cassettes and VHS tapes. So cassette and VHS tapes are very sensitive film formats. The only way to preserve them is to keep them in very, very cold storage, like refrigerators and stuff. If you have those film formats, you should be getting them digitized to preserve them, because there's basically nothing to do to preserve them in the format that they are right now. That's my advice to you, is to look into digitization of those. Most other types of film are great to preserve yourself. I wouldn't tell you to get rid of them, but VHS tapes, they're bad. The recommended conditions for temperature are 59 to 77 degrees, which again, pretty much the comfort level for most people. This is a picture here of rubber. Rubber gets really, really brittle over time. This picture is of cellulose nitrate film. When it gets really old and bad, it turns this like really yellow, crispy, gross color. Hopefully you guys don't have too much cellulose nitrate film in your homes. And this unfortunate picture is of a piece of parchment that somebody tried to laminate. So this is a warning not to laminate your documents in heat. Heat did that. All right, thieves and vandals is an agent of deterioration that hopefully you won't have to deal with, but if you do, it can look different depending on what you have. So the way to prevent it is to take a good look at what you have and what the risks are for your things. It's important to know what you have, so do an inventory so you understand what things that you have and where they are. If you have a large art collection, it's really important to know what pieces you have. But even if you don't have a large art collection, it's worthwhile to know what all of your pictures are and where things are stored and all of that information. It's really important for insurance purposes as well. It's important to identify possible risks and how they could be mitigated. So an example here is if you have something on display outside, like a piece of art outside that you really like, that's always valuable. One way that you could mitigate risk to that piece of art is to put a light outside that goes on when somebody walks by it. That would reduce some of the risk of damage to that piece of art. So other types of security measures include using display cases, security cameras, and limiting key access to your home or your display cases or things like that. These are just some examples of different kinds of damage from thieves and vandals. Pollutants, this is a big one. This is damage caused by gases and fine particles in the air. Fine particles in the air really mean dust. This can cause corrosion or tarnish, staining, dust and dirty deposits, and chemical breakdown of some materials. Common sources include car exhaust, ozone, and indoor furnishings like wood and particle board, and non-archival storage materials like PVC and plastic. So, use archivally safe storage and display materials. Use air filters with a high air filtration rating. Very faithfully gone through and stored all of his coins, or a lot of his coins, in these little coin sleeves that he bought, presumably that had been sold specifically for storing your coins in your own collections, marketed for coin collectors. And unfortunately for him, they were all made out of PVC, which is a plastic, a clear plastic, which when it deteriorates, it releases hydrochloric acid when it deteriorates. And I don't know if you know this, but hydrochloric acid is really bad. And it caused a lot of his coins to start deteriorating and losing value. So this coin here is turning green. It's a penny, and it's corroding. It's turning green because of the acidic environment that it's in. It's turning green because of corrosion. And this is like from a number of years ago. These coins that he was collecting are from a number of years ago, but I have found to this day that there are places and art stores that are still selling things that they're labeling archival that are made out of PVC. So you have to be very cautious when you buy materials for your collections that you're buying actually archival materials. You're looking at what they're actually made from. And I'll tell you when we go through the resources section a little bit more on what to look for, but you have to see what exactly the materials are and don't just look for buzzwords like archival or acid-free, these kinds of words. People will just throw them around, and they'll go look at the material and it will be PVC, and it's like, that's not archival. That will turn my coins green. So you have to be very, very careful. And the next thing I want to talk about is wood and particle board. Particle board furniture, this is bad. It releases formaldehyde it's just, that's what it releases. It's fine for your furniture, for your house or whatever, but don't use it to display things in. It's probably not great in general, but I use it because it's a lot cheaper to own for your home. Wood is more complicated. This picture here is a wood frame, and you can see here that this wood knot on the back of the frame has left this little brown acidic stain on the front of this print here. And that's because the wood knot has like a lot more acidic vapors than the rest of the wood, but the whole print is a lot yellower because of the proximity to the wood itself. Wood releases organic acids as it ages as well. They're not great for our things either. But that said, wood is really common to use in our homes and really common to use in museums also. And it's not always bad. If you have a piece of furniture that you're using that's made out of wood and it's been in your home for a long time, it's probably already off-gassed all of the acidic vapors that it has, and it's probably safe to use to store your things. If you're looking for a new display cabinet for your stuff, I would recommend buying something that's made out of glass or metal instead of buying something new that's wood, because that will be a lot safer as a display or storage material than buying something that's made out of wood. But if you're using something old, an old piece of furniture, wood is probably fine. And if you really do want to use wood and you're very concerned about it, you could lay out a barrier material between a wood shelf and the wooden and the object that you're putting on it on display, even a layer of tin foil or something like that would provide some barrier between the acids coming out of the wood and your object. But I do wanted to give you some caution about using wood. It does cause acidic damage to your stuff. But I also don't want everybody to go home and throw out all of their wood furniture. All right, this is the last agent of deterioration and the weirdest, but you're gonna be really happy that I told you about it. Dissociation is the loss of information or the loss of the object itself. For example, it can be misplacing something, losing its paperwork, forgetting why it's valuable, accidental disposal, and digital formats becoming obsolete. The larger your collection, the more stuff you have, the more difficult it is to keep track of everything, which is why this is a big problem for museums and really important for museums because they have lots of stuff. And maybe a little bit less something that people think about in their homes, but it's still really important for people to think about it in their homes. So here are some things that you can do to prevent dissociation at home. You can be labeling your stuff so that you understand and remember what it is, and that includes your photographs. Label the people in your photographs so you remember who everybody is, or your kids remember who everybody is. You can keep an inventory of your valuables, and again, this is great for insurance purposes if something were to ever happen. It's great for passing things on later in life. It's great for a lot of reasons. Organize your paperwork in one place so you know where all of the paperwork is. I know that I have like a couple of nicer pieces of art and that have certificates of authenticity, and have made a point to keep those certificates in the same place so that I remember I only have to look in one place to find them if I were ever to want to find them again. This is one that people have been really adamant that I include in this slide from different presentations that I've given, to record stories of your family heirlooms, to share and to remember why they're important to you and your family. This is really, really crucial. I know that my mom has given me various pieces of like family heirlooms that she's like, I think this belonged to your great grandmother, but I'm not 100% sure. And so I have like different plates and stuff that I'm like, this is old, but I don't really know anything more about it. It would be great if I had more information. That would be a lot more valuable to me if I knew whose it was and more information about it. So if you remember those stories, that's really, really important. And it also adds a lot of value to it if it's something that you want to donate to a museum someday, because museums have a lot of things already in them, and they only really are interested in accepting things that have like a full story attached to them. So if you have like, I'm gonna say, let's say you have a typewriter. This museum probably already has like 6 typewriters, but if you have a typewriter and you can tell this whole story of the typewriter belonged to my grandfather who owned the store, and the store was in business from this time to this time, and I had this picture of my grandfather using the typewriter to sell these products, and you can tell like a whole varied story with a lot of depth to it, you know, and you have that all written down and you're ready to go. That makes it a lot more compelling of a piece for a museum to accept, rather than just being like, hey, do you want this typewriter? They'll be more interested in it with the story attached. So that is my piece of information about dissociation. And my last piece of information that I really want to tell everybody, this is very important. Don't throw out your photos after you've digitized them. When you digitize your photos, they're great, really easy to share online, very easy to put on Facebook or other places. It's really, really hard to preserve and maintain digital files. It is a whole separate conversation that would require another hour-long presentation for me to give you on preserving digital files. It's a complicated field. It's a lot easier to preserve physical photographs. Physical photographs are actually not that hard to preserve. You just have to follow some of the steps that I've given you already. Otherwise, I'm sure you guys remember floppy disks and stuff. Like, we don't use those anymore. You have to maintain lots of different types of file formats and transfer them from one format to another format, and it's so much easier to just keep the originals and preserve those. So when you digitize something, keep the original photograph and just use the digital file to share online. All right, we're moving on to recommendations. So a lot of the information that I shared with you today is how to prevent damage from happening. If you already have damage that occurred and you want somebody to help you repair that damage, you want to find a conservator. Conservators are the specialty of profession who will help you repair damage. These are some places where you can look to find people to help you with that. The first email there is actually my email address. That will get you to me. I don't do this work for you, but I can help you get to people who will. This is just an easier email to remember than my full name at MNHS.org. It's conservation@MNHS.org. These other two emails are URLs are both directories online that are full of they have conservators or other types of specialties that are really useful to help you find people to do work for you. These are places where you can find archival supplies to preserve your stuff. So the first link here is really long and terrible because the MNHS website is undergoing work right now to get updated. So it's probably a lot easier to just type in to like a search engine, MNHS finding archival supplies for preservation, and then it will pop up. But this is like a short web page that I've written up about like what kinds of boxes to use and what kinds of plastics are good and that sort of thing. It will give you some guidelines on buying the right kinds of materials. And then here I have written 3 websites that are really like well-known and established places to buy archival supplies. These are not the only places that sell archival supplies. You can get archival stuff in a lot of different places, but these are just 3 places that are really trustworthy. So I wanted to share those with you. If you have an emergency that damages some of your stuff and you want help dealing with the fallout from that, after you've called 911 to deal with the emergency, you can, these are 3 different places where you can look for help. The first link is to the National Heritage Responders, who I've already told you a little bit about. The second link is for the Minnesota Alliance for Heritage Response, which is a local organization, Minnesota-based. And then the third is, again, to the MNHS website, which you might just want to type in MNHS Disaster Response and Recovery Resources. There's a lot of really useful links and resources on there about how to salvage stuff and dry stuff out or other information that you might find useful. If you find pests in your stuff and you want more information about museum pests, there's only one resource that you need. This website has everything that you could possibly need to know about museum pests, so I just only included it, the one resource. It's really great. Here are some generally trustworthy sources of information. I like all of these links. If you are interested in conservation and you just wanted to peruse these, you would probably find all of them interesting. They have a lot of like, if you want to care for books, if you want to polish your silver, if you want to do blah, blah, blah. These will all be like really great reads for you. They all have really good different information. And some of the information is the same on all of them because we agree on the right way to do the things. And this is, again, my contact information. Now we have time for question and answer. I took a long time to talk, but I'll stay later if you guys have more questions. So, yeah.
Any idea, you mentioned about preservation of things like VHS, any idea what the average shelf life is of VHS tapes, that type of thing?
It depends on the storage conditions that the VHS tapes are in. So if it's in a cooler environment, they're gonna last longer than if they're in a warmer environment. And then it also probably depends on when the VHS tapes were made and lots of other things. There are, if you look at the second link there, the CCI website, Canadian Conservation Institute, has an article about VHS, like preservation of VHS tapes, which is what I would look to for more specific information about dealing with them.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
What about these big sterilized plastic tubs that are for sale all over the place?
Yeah, great question. So I like to tell people to store things in archival boxes, but there are pros and cons to storing things in archival, like cardboard box versus like a plastic tub in your home, which I will discuss. So an archival cardboard box is great because it sort of helps buffer the environment. it will absorb humidity and release humidity, and protect the things that are inside. It's like a nice, they tend to be like nice sizes for holding things that are not too heavy for it, because it can't really hold things that are too heavy without collapsing it on itself. So it makes them easier to hold. They're breathable, so they're not likely to get mold inside of them, whereas sterile, like a plastic tub, there is a risk of things getting moldy inside of them if you put things in when it's kind of humid outside. They will get damaged by water, and so that if there's a water event, like if they get wet because there's a flood or something, you would have to replace them, which a sterilite tub, a plastic tub, would be, like, they could get wet and then you could dry them off, you know? So that's an advantage that plastic has if you're storing something, if you have to store something in a basement or an attic because you have no other options. You would have to, if you store things in a plastic tub, you would have to be careful of a couple of things. You would have to be careful that you're using a type of plastic that is archivally safe. So you would want to make sure that it's made out of like something like polyethylene or polypropylene. You would want to make sure that you're not filling it too much so that it's not too heavy. It would be really tempting to fill them really full because they can be quite big, but you don't want to make them so heavy that they're difficult to hold or that the things at the bottom are getting crushed by the things at the top. And you would want to make sure that you're not opening them up and closing them on days that are really humid. You might even want to punch some holes in the side to make sure that there can be airflow through them, so that it doesn't get really humid inside. And like the humid stagnant air is what causes mold growth. But there can be advantages to using plastic in a home if you wanted to keep things in a basement. And they are a lot less expensive than archival boxes. So I can understand the appeal. But I would probably also recommend using like a clear plastic rather than like one of the dark colored plastics so that you can see inside more easily and see what's going on in there just by walking past.
Hey, we want to talk about sleeping photos,
Yeah.
the necessity, are there guidelines about like, if it's so old, maybe it needs a sleeve versus something that's newer?
Yeah, great question. So photos, I really like to recommend people store their photos in boxes. And then it is nice to put your photos in sleeves because photos have a tendency to like stick together otherwise. And if you have your photos in the sleeve, then they're not going to stick together in a pile. If they get a little sticky, because they get sticky when it's a little humid, and if it's stuck to its sleeve a little bit, then that's better than it getting stuck to the photograph in front of it. You can get either plastic sleeves or paper sleeves, and there are, again, advantages and disadvantages to both. I like a paper sleeve because I trust paper a lot more than plastic. I don't trust plastic. Plastics are new. But there are safe plastics. Again, there's like, you can get acrylic sleeves or polyethylene or polypropylene sleeves are all technically known to be safer for storage than other kinds of sleeves. Just don't get a PVC sleeve. And the advantage of the plastic sleeves are that you can see through them, so you don't have to take the picture out. You can just look at it through the plastic, and you can touch the plastic all over, and you're not leaving your fingerprints all over the photos. And then a paper sleeve, the advantage then is that it's paper, and we know from millenniums of using paper that it's gonna last for a really long time. But then you have to like open up the paper to see your picture. When it comes to like how old the photos are, I don't think it matters how old the photos are. I think it's better to have them in some sort of sleeve. If you have them in an album, you can also buy archival albums. Just make sure that the sleeves that are like the plastic sleeves that they're in the album are also made with the right kind of plastic. And don't use like anything with like the magnetic backing or like any sort of adhesive on the pictures themselves, because there's one thing that conservators hate, it's glue or any kind of tape, so avoid anything like that. That will be good for long-term preservation. Hope that answered your question. Yeah?
Can you give us a website reference for preserving and passing on digital records?
Yeah, let me see. I think that, I don't know for sure, but I would guess, my guess is that this one, I think I'm working it myself.
You're good.
The number 3, the Northeast Document Conservation Center is the resource here. They really specialize in document preservation, and I think that they would have good resources on digital preservation. Yeah.
This has been incredibly thorough. You've answered all my questions, but I'm not sure I heard you say anything about acid-free.
Yeah, acid-free is, it's an aspect of, like cardboard, like paper storage materials. So I didn't really get that much into like the right kind of archival supplies, other than to tell you that there's some kinds of plastic that are really bad and some kinds that are okay. When you're looking at archival papers and boxes and folders and supplies, they will use the term acid-free, and for papers, it will say, for paper materials, it does mean something kind of to say acid-free, because what they really mean is that they've removed a component of the paper called lignin from the paper, which breaks down into an acidic material, and the acidic material will then damage the stuff that's inside the box, or the folder, or the paper, or whatever. People will also use acid-free on plastics, and it's like, there's nothing acidic in the plastic, there shouldn't be. So they'll just use it as like again, it's like a buzzword, but the kinds of terms that you wanna see are like lignin-free is like a better one than acid-free for paper. And then for plastics, you wanna see the specific type of plastic that things are made out of, and then that will be really helpful. Another really great term that you can use when you're looking at archival supplies is something called PAT tested. Let me see if I can find you an example. So let's go to one of these. Let's see, I don't know if I'll be able to do it, but we're gonna try.
Taylor?
Yeah. We're gonna try going to one of the sites and looking for something. There's a label on like archival supplies called PAT tested.
What do we wanna look for?
Look for like a photo sleeve. And this is a special type of testing done for archival supplies.
Anything in particular?
Yeah, just hit the first one. Let's make sure that it's been PAT tested. And then scroll down.
Specs?
Yeah, hit specs.
If it seems like I'm familiar with this site, it's because it's one of our main suppliers.
You're just smart.
Okay, this one doesn't have it. Let's go to another one.
Maybe the free mill polyester L sleeve?
Yeah, let's hit that one. There we go. Past PAT. So this is a really, this is like an actual, like solid gold star. It passed the photographic activity test. It's not a buzzword, it's an actual test that was done to show that it's safe for use in contact with photographic materials over the long term. So the stuff that's on Gaylord Archival, the other stuff is probably also safe. It's fine because I trust Gaylord Archival to be selling archival supplies. Or if it's not archival, like I've seen somebody recently bought bubble wrap off of Gaylord Archival, and they assumed that it was safe for storage of their collections because they bought it off of Gaylord Archival. Bubble wrap is actually not great for storing things in because it can leave impressions of the bubbles on stuff, which if they had read the description from Gaylord Archival, it did say in the description, not for use for long-term storage. But it's one of these things that's tricky because you think you're in like a safe place to buy supplies, so they didn't think that the bubble wrap was gonna be bad, but that's why I go to places and tell people, give people advice. I'm like, bubble wrap actually is not that great, you should be using foam. So anyway, this is all to say, if you see the PAT label, that's a good one. And again, yeah, things are expensive, archival supplies aren't cheap, but it's worth it because then things last for a really, really, really long time. You don't have to worry about things falling apart. I've seen some really, really tragic things happening to things that weren't properly cared for. Yeah.
I have two old crazy quilts, probably 90 to 100 years old, that were passed down to me. They need to be cleaned.
Okay.
What do you do?
Yeah, that's tricky.
And it's very heavy. The one that's, I mean, it must be, have wool inside of it because it's real heavy.
There's a couple of options. One option is, how much does it really need to be cleaned? Cleaning old historic textiles is really, really risky for things that are like that old. There's just like real risk of like damage because those fabrics get really, really fragile as they age, and then when you get them wet in any capacity, it makes them like way, way more fragile, and they get really, really heavy too as they absorb water. So it's like very, very difficult to actually clean them. When a conservator cleans something that's really old, they won't get the whole thing wet typically, unless they've done like a lot of testing to make sure that the fabric is strong enough to do that. They will do like spot cleaning, so they'll just clean the part that's wet or dirty.
It's probably more dust than it is, because I'm sure they have it, well, I have it on a quilt rack, so it's out in the open.
Yeah, well, you can remove dust from a quilt by vacuuming. The trick to using a vacuum on a textile is to use a vacuum that you can ideally control the suction level on. So there are some vacuums where you can change the dial and it will change how much suction it's using, and you can use like a low amount of suction, and so it's not like whoop, sucking the entire quilt all the way up into the tube. Like ideally, I would tell you to hire a conservator to clean the quilts because they have all of the tools, they have the right kinds of vacuums, they have the right kinds of skills to clean the quilts. It can be hard because sometimes it's really expensive to hire a conservator to do something. It's worthwhile asking, like looking into the conservation route to see how much it would cost and whether it would be worthwhile for you. But you might also know somebody who has the right kind of vacuum and you feel like you could do it yourself. That is the pathway to do it yourself. There are also like, you can buy certain kinds of like, even like makeup cosmetic sponges are really good at removing dust from things. If you like use those like makeup sponges that you buy at a drugstore and tap them on the surface of things, they'll absorb a lot of dust off of things. So that's another method that people use to remove dust off of fragile surfaces. So these are all various methods, but I did want to warn people against getting things wet.
question that I think everybody must have in this room and they haven't asked it. And that is, you know, you talk about what's the comfortable temperature for us and your belongings, 65 to 68 year round if you can make it, particularly winter. Is that too cold? I mean, some of us can tolerate that. And the other thing is, if the dew point gets over 60, if you listen to the weatherman, they say that's tropical, and that's the way it feels. So when that happens, and you get that kind of report, you get fans going to move the air, what other options do you have? Where your stuff is?
Yeah, 65 to 68 degrees, it's a great temperature for things. Dew point, like, moving the air around, first of all, is a great way to prevent mold growth. Stagnant air, again, is a really, like, starter pack for mold. It likes stagnant air, so moving the air around is good. Dehumidifiers are a great way. If you feel it's getting humid, dehumidifiers are a great way to remove the humidity.
Below 40, like 30?
To below 40, it doesn't need to be below 40, it just needs to be below 70. 70%.
I don't know where people put stuff if it isn't the attic in the basement.
Here, I have some tips for you. My big tip for you is underneath beds. This is a good place to keep things. Underneath beds and inside of interior closets in your home is I know that people's closets are full, but like usually people have space under their beds that they're not using. You can put stuff there. Yeah?
I have a marriage certificate of my in-laws in a beautiful frame, but they let water get in there. Is there any way you can get that back?
Yeah, there's usually something that can be done after something's been damaged. There's very rare cases where a conservator would look at something and be like, this is garbage now. Most of the time, if you showed me a picture of something, I would be able to give you some advice on how to improve the situation. Or sometimes it's something that only a professional would be able to accomplish, but that even a professional would be able to do something. Often, it's not something that could be returned to looking as good as new, but it could be improved.
Do you know of any certain place that would do it?
There are places, most of the conservators in Minnesota are located in the Twin Cities, but there's also a paper conservator in St. Peter that's probably the closest to here. Yeah.
So I've got stacks of photo albums,
Yes.
scrapbooks, things from my parents, things of mine. To digitize, simply take a camera shot of them and put them onto a CD or DVD. Granted, we might have to update that to a flash drive, but I don't think my kids are gonna wanna store all of these albums. And if I can get it onto some DVDs, maybe they'll hang on to them and have them for future. And is it just take a picture and with a digital camera and that's what you do?
Can't do that. Another method is like a flatbed scanner. Those are really good methods for digitizing. Those are at most libraries, the flatbed scanners. Flash drives are like not very expensive these days and a lot more stable than a CD or DVD, and a lot smaller also. So I would recommend like a flatbed scanner and a flash drive. And like if you're going through your photographs, there's probably some that are like more valuable than others as you go through the photographs, and you can pare it down to like some albums that you keep the photos, the physical photos from, and some that you don't, you know? I know that's true for me too, like even as I take photos on my camera, like some of them I print and some of them I don't print now, so.
I just have a comment, our library has a flatbed scanner, and you can go use it for free, they'll help you with it. And you can put
You just wanna scan them as at a high resolution so that you get like the best quality picture out of it as you can. If you're gonna try to preserve them that way, that's the best way to do it. Yeah.
Hi, I volunteered at a different museum, and we're moving, some furniture from a not great storage space to a hopefully better storage space, but it has a white powder on it, which I'm guessing is mold. And so, I guess my question is, I can guess what your answer's gonna be, but I'm gonna ask anyway. How gung ho do we need to be about cleaning that before it's moved?
Great question. Ideally, let me think about it. If the environment in the new facility is dry and like not likely to be moldy, then that's pretty safe to move, but one step that you can do in between is to kill the mold using like a dilute alcohol spray. So it's a little tricky if it's on like a varnished furniture. You want to test it a little bit first to make sure that it's not going to really damage the varnish. It might be okay, but if it's like isopropanol in water solution that you can spritz on the mold before you move it, or like in between, like you take it out of the house, it's outside, then you spray it with the alcohol, then that should be enough to kill the mold before you move it into the new facility.
And we assume that just, we can see it on the wood and the varnish darker stuff. We assume that other stuff has mold on it as well, and should be clean.
Yeah, mold is microscopic, you know, so mold spores are invisible to the naked eye. They're everywhere in this room right now, you can't see them. There will definitely be mold that you can't see, but I don't want you to go around spraying alcohol on things that you can't see, and if it could be possibly causing damage to like varnished wood. But it would be good, like, after the mold is dead and has had a chance to dry out at the new facility, what you're gonna wanna do is take all of that furniture out on like a nice, dry, sunny day, preferably windy, with like a wind that's blowing away from you.
Just share the love.
You want the wind to be blowing away from you guys to like somewhere far away. And then you're gonna brush and vacuum all of that dust, all of that mold off, and you can clean, you should do that on all of the surfaces, regardless of whether or not there's visible mold. Yeah, that's what I would recommend. And you should definitely be wearing masks. COVID masks are good for more than just COVID, also great for mold.
So if it's a white powder, without testing, is all dust mold? Because I wouldn't think so, but.
That's a great question. There are a lot of things that a white powder can be on something.
Skin. Heavy traffic. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot of different things it could be. It can be dust, it can be mold, it can be salt. If something's like sitting on the floor, say like in a garage or something, it can be salt coming up from the ground. There's something called, this is very fun, you're gonna like it. It's called a fatty spew. That's white. It comes out of leather, especially leather materials that have been like oiled a lot, like leather, like horse tack and stuff. This is something that museums sometimes see as this white fat coming back out of the material, and it's called a fatty spew.
So it might not be mold on leather.
It might not be mold, it could be the fatty spew, but if you're getting mold on other things, it's probably mold on everything. Mold is very very common to be the white stuff, especially, one way to really identify mold is if it's coming up in like little circular patterns. And it looks like a biological growth. That makes it more likely to be mold. You can identify salts if you look at it really closely, especially under like a magnification, and you can see the salt crystals. But yeah, there's even a funny museum blog that I have looked at before called "What's That White Stuff?"
That's a good one. That is.
One last thing, these storage places that, you know, are populating all of our cornfields and replacing them, I think the answer is never put them in there.
Yeah, you can do it, I mean, you can buy like a data logger of some kind to put in a storage facility to monitor the environment that's in there along with your stuff. There are things like that that exist to like make sure that it's the right environment, but if it's in a place that you're not accessing regularly, so you don't know what the environment is like. Otherwise, if you don't have that sort of like tracker to see what the environment is, then it's sort of like who knows. So I do like better keeping things in the space where you are, so you really know what's going on.
Thank you.
Well, you guys have my email address if you have more questions. Please feel free to contact me.